now. And it says we're live, so.
Going live.
Everybody's there, Debbie?
Yeah, it's working.
There she is. Hi, Debbie. And we are live on YouTube right now, so once we get to the 6 o'clock hour, you can start whenever you're ready to roll.
Okay, thank you.
How you doing, Miss Evelyn?
I'm doing well. Am I sounding better? I heard it was really bad last time.
It couldn't be any worse than last time.
Okay.
Yeah,
It is better.
you are good
All right.
now. Yeah.
I turned down the volume on my computer, so let me just know if you have any other ideas. Or on my speaker. Let me know if it goes. How's it going? Because I wasn't aware of that, obviously. So.
Sounds very good. Very good.
Much better, Debbie. Well, let's hope it holds. For sure.
Gibson wasn't the legal son, wasn't he, a little bit? Kirk Gibson?
So how is everyone?
Good.
Good. Oh, I want to say, Kelly called me about 20 minutes ago, Kelly Mercick. She's in Florida, but she was going to come to our meeting anyway, but her daughter is running a fever, so she's not going to be able to join us tonight.
He got, I think, 4 cortisone.
I'm sorry, she's sick. Yeah.
Cortisone shots, so he took a picture. He basically ended his career by helping them win a World Series.
Who was that?
Millwall Cox. He just kept getting cortisone shots off the pitch. The guy would pitch 6, 7 innings. I mean, he was incredible with his age and everything. Unlike today where they won't do that. Because they're afraid about what their next contract will bring if they don't. They get hurt, they want that money before they give up their seasons.
I like that picture of Allison outside on the patio.
That's where we wish we all are, right?
Yeah. Amen.
What'd she say?
It's a lot easier to hear you too. Your connection's much better out there.
Yeah, I'm closer to my Wi-Fi.
Okay.
Okay, I have 6 o'clock. I'm going to call to order the regular board meeting of the Woodford County Board of Education. Please let the record show that all members are present. And we'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Everybody find a flag in your home. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. I just want to make a couple announcements before we begin. If you are speaking to the board or please turn on your video so we can see you as well as hear you. And then also, I just want to remind everyone that all of the comments that you post on this site are visible to everybody. So as a courtesy, please try to refrain from doing that. All right. The next thing is proposed amendments to the agenda. These, I'm gonna change some order of some things, but not really change the agenda items themselves. Items J, K, and L, I want to do those in reverse order, so we do L first, then K, and then J. So I'll remind you of that when we get down to that portion. I think that makes more logical sense. All right, we will have the superintendent's remarks. Mr. Hawkins?
Thank you, Ms. Edelin. Good evening and welcome to our June Board of Education meeting. The end of this school year and planning for 2020-21 is very different than any year we have previously experienced. Anything that is done requires a tremendous amount of logistical planning, not only at the school level, but also coordinating these plans with our local health department. I want to say a word of thanks to Cassie Prather and her staff at the Woodford County Health Department for their tremendous support and responsiveness with these efforts. We have always had a great relationship with them, but that has only grown stronger over these past several months.
Can you turn everything off in here, please?
Our Woodford County High School virtual graduation wrapped up on June 5th. Obviously, it was not our typical graduation and the preparation was far more extensive. Thank you to our high school administrative team of Mr. Ferris and Ms. Forgy for their time and commitment, along with our school counselors, Ms. Wilson, Ms. Taylor, and Ms. Lusby, for all they did to make things go very smoothly. And a very special thank you to Mr. Ellis, our senior sponsor. He was there throughout the event and did an outstanding job in ensuring this was a special time for our seniors and their families. The video is complete, and we will be having a premiere showing of the graduation on Thursday evening at 7 o'clock. And look for an announcement on our Facebook page, and we will put that announcement out as well through the high school message that goes out each day. Our staff continues with planning for the reopening of the school year. The feedback from our parents and our staff will be extremely beneficial as those plans begin to take shape. We will follow the guidance from the governor and state health officials with the goal of having our students return to the classroom when school begins. Thank you again for tuning in this evening. It's an honor to serve as your superintendent, and I know with all of us working together, we can become the flagship school district in Kentucky.
Thank you, Mr. Hawkins. I had added board member remarks tonight. I think this might just be something we do tonight, or we'll see. I had people indicate to me that they were going to speak. One of them was Ms. Springay. Do you want to go ahead, Ms. Springay? Sherry, can you hear me?
She frozen.
I think her connection is lagging. She was trying to get it figured out.
Okay, should we text her, or are you helping her, Bob, or?
Grant, do we need to stop the meeting until her connection is ensured?
That would probably be a good idea.
Okay, let's give it a couple of minutes and see if we can get back to Ms. Springate, right? She's left the meeting, so if someone can reach out to her and see if we can get that going again.
Just need to pause the agenda here for a minute until she reconnects.
Okay, we'll just take a brief recess until we get her back.
I just sent her a text. Let's see. There she is. You're muted.
I apologize.
There.
I'm having internet problems today. I'm not sure if it's, I'm not sure what's going on. Where are we at on the agenda?
I had gotten to board member remarks, and I knew you had indicated a desire to say something, so I was calling on you to do that. We don't see your video.
Let me try to fix that.
Okay.
I can see her.
Yeah. She's
Oh,
on
you
there.
can?
Yes.
Okay, I just see an S, but that's okay. Go ahead.
Okay. I do apologize. I'm not sure. I've not had any computer problems really ever in my meetings, so I really do apologize.
It's going to happen for all of us at one point.
Okay. Well, I can kind of hear a little bit, some changes in the agenda, so if you don't mind, when we get to those parts, if you'll just remind me or let me know. I didn't hear the beginning of the meeting.
Okay, but the only thing that was changed was the order of J, K, and L. It's going to be L, K, J. So the agenda items haven't changed. We're just going to do them in a different order.
Thank you. I did wish to make a few brief remarks. So there are many issues that I would like to talk about this evening, but due to time, I've elected to speak about the recent June the 4th special meeting. Before I go into specifics, I want to begin with the board's questionable behavior leading up to the meeting. Prior to the May 11th meeting, both Ms. Bradley and Ms. Edlin had contacted attorney Joshua Salisbury to share information regarding a confidential meeting with an employee. Immediately after contacting attorney Salisbury, Ms. Edlin should have shared the information with all 5 board members. This did not happen. A confidential and privileged electronic communication from attorney Salisbury was sent to Mrs. Edlin and Mrs. Bradley on May the 26th. This letter should have immediately been forwarded to all board members, but again, this did not happen. I didn't receive a copy of this letter until an hour before the June 4th session, 8 days after Ms. Edlin received the initial communication. When I questioned Ms. Edlin about this delay, she told me it wasn't intentional. As I have stated in the meeting, I wasn't given the courtesy of being told about the special session until 2 days before it occurred. And even though I shared my availability with Ms. Edlin, which did not include the Thursday morning, she proceeded with it with no regards to my schedule. This action makes me wonder if the board hoped I would not be able to attend. As a result of all that has transpired with this issue, I have put both attorneys on notice as well as the board chair that I would like to be included in all board conversations. I am now making it public. From this point forward, I will call out all exclusionary and unethical behavior by this board. As troubling as what I've shared thus far may seem, the information that follows is even more disturbing. Last Monday, June the 8th, the same employee referenced in the special session by both Danny and Debbie sent the following email to me and copied all board members. I didn't mention the correspondence last Monday night, as I had hoped the employee's email would put an end to the situation. But unfortunately, the board doesn't know the meaning of the word stop. Late last week, I emailed the employee to share that I would be reading the shared communication at tonight's meeting. To ensure I don't accidentally insert information or misspeak, I will read it verbatim, omitting any identifiable statements. Here's the email. First, I want to let you know that I am blind copying every board member on this email so you all get the same information. Second, there is no new plan. I wanted to explain to Danny and Debbie that the pandemic is going to hit us hard and I cannot predict how bad it might be, and I asked them to unrestrict the funds and cancel the BG for the new high school. They both indicated to me that they did not want to cancel the BG, and when they said that, I simply said, then revise the BG so it does not include general fund obligations. I do not recommend that. I told them repeatedly that we would not recommend anything other than canceling the BG, but when they both told me that they would not support this complete cancellation, my response was, please revise the BG so that it does not obligate general funds. We have looked at what our bonding potential would be if we did not have general fund committed more than once in a board meeting. They both asked me questions about when we would be going to bid, and I told them I cannot make that recommendation. The architect has said January might be the best, but I do not know, and they need to consider what RTA and Trace Creek recommends over what I think. They also asked me what would happen if we cannot build the high school for the amount of funds we have, and I said As I have said, we will not know the cost of the new high school until it is bid. Then we need to consider our options at that time. The only other topic of discussion was the cash we have in restricted funds. Again, not new information. If you pull the revised BG1 that was included in the February board meeting, the cash was included. This was only brought up when talking about the amount of the BG1 being equal to only our available bonding amount, and I did remind them that we currently have $1.2 million of cash on the original BG1 that could continue to be there, and I did mention the restricted cash we currently have that was added to the BG1 and that was now on the revised BG1 in February. Again, nothing new. During the discussion of the cash, I also asked to please consider not using all of our restricted funds on revised BG and approved capital funds request to recoup some of our allowable general fund costs to the current year to alleviate some of our deficit instead of using all our restricted funds on the revised BG, which also is nothing new. I do not think that any of this is new information, but everyone was at an impasse and we all need to get through, and my hope was to explain and convince them of the need to unrestrict general funds and cancel the BG1. As you can see, this is a vastly different story from the one told to the public by Mrs. Bradley and Mrs. Edelin at the quickly called special session held on June the 4th. I believe the fact that this person wanted to share their side of the story speaks to the integrity and character of this individual, and I'm sure that it was not an easy email to write.
Okay. I believe Mr. Wilson also had some comments.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson. I wanted to talk about this last week because it was heavy on my heart last week, and it continues to be that way today. And it's about the current events in our country. And I would like to start off my comments by reading a superintendent statement on the issue. The tensions and circumstances that continue to unfold across the United States are painful and difficult to watch. These events cannot be met with silence. We must take the time and opportunity to have direct and open conversations about race with our kids. It's not enough for us to simply say we are not racist. That approach is too neutral and too passive. We must be active and purposeful in creating an atmosphere of anti-racism. Our school system and community is committed to acknowledging the systemic cycle of racism and hate that exists in our world and to improve our systems so we can guide our students to build a better future for all of us. While our teachers, support staff, and school leaders address racial issues as they arise, it's not enough for us to be reactive about this issue. One of our district core values is embrace differences. To truly live out this core value, we must be dedicated to equity through social emotional learning rooted in empathy and compassion in order to truly make a difference for our students and our community. We must be committed to actively addressing issues around racial diversity as it remains a key issue in American society. It is my prayer that together we can create a way forward in dismantling racism, inequities, and other negative influences that affect our communities and our nation. This can be done by working together to ensure that our curriculum is diverse and culturally sensitive. We must ensure that cultural responsiveness is present at all levels of the district, from teaching and learning to our buses and facilities, and at all levels of professional growth and community outreach. As much as we may want to deny it, we all have biases based on our own life experiences. We must continue to navigate these differences to better understand each other, our worlds, and advocate for a better, more equitable future. We must be resilient in our commitment to ensure that students leave our schools fully prepared to succeed in a society that is ever more racially ethnically, and socioeconomically diverse. We need to help our children understand the issues behind what is playing out in the streets, on the news, and on the social media as a response to racially charged incidents by having a much needed discussion around implicit bias and systemic racism. As a parent, I know these can be difficult conversations, but we must be brave and vulnerable. Let's teach our kids to love and appreciate people of different skin colors, cultures, religions, and origins, and learn from their experiences. In the days and weeks ahead, we will share information with families to assess educational resources to combat racism. We are committed to having courageous conversations. We are here to listen, learn, and support. If our students master academic standards, but fail to appreciate the value of being inclusive, respectful, and diversity, then we fall short of preparing them for tomorrow. Every adult and child in our community should be safe, seen, loved, valued, and dignified. Let's work together to make sure that all of our students have the support they need to be successful. Signed, Dr. Jesse Bacon, Superintendent, Bullitt County Public Schools. Dr. Bacon is a young superintendent. I believe he's in his second year of being a superintendent. And the statement that he wrote, I know, shows a great deal of wisdom, leadership, and courage. And the statement was dated last week, June 5th, 2020. Last Monday before the school board meeting, I was listening to the governor's address regarding COVID-19, and the lieutenant governor commented about what was happening in society today. And she said that public education is designed for times like these. And this statement is very true, but we as educators have to do more. We must realize that it's not enough to say we are not a racist any longer. That approach is too neutral. As Dr. Bacon said, that approach is too passive. That approach does not address and will not address the issue for us. That approach does not lead to change. And Dr. Bacon said further, we must be purposeful and active in creating an atmosphere of anti-racism. You know, we've all heard the saying, actions speak louder than words, but a gentleman named Matthew Good had another quote. He said, actions speak louder than words, and sometimes inaction speaks louder than both. Two areas that we have to do better as board members on the Woodford County Board of Education is in the area of minority hiring and also the education of our minority students as we try to decrease the gap between them and other students. But I honestly and fervently believe in order for us to begin that process, we have to throw away the excuses of the past. You know, we can't say any longer we've tried everything. We can't say we can't solve all the problems of society. We can't use the excuse, there's only so much time in the day. We can't use the excuse we cannot replace the family. And we have to quit saying we're making steady progress, because steady progress is not progress. Thank you, Madam Chairperson.
Thank you so much, Mr. Wilson. I don't think did anybody else want to make any remarks? We will still have our discussion period. The next item is the treasurer's report and approve the May financial report. We heard this from Ms. Smith last week. Do we have a motion to approve the treasurer's report? The May report.
So moved.
Mr. Wilson, do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Ms. Springate. Any discussion?
I did have some discussion. I just have a couple questions for Amy or Mr. Hawkins. I have a question about the construction fund. Is that amount? Is Amy there?
Amy, could you turn on your audio or your video when you're speaking, please? I think she's there, Sherry.
Okay, thank you. Is that amount, that $722,934.02, is that the amount of cash we have left on the BG1, the previous BG1?
So Debbie, I do not have video on this machine, so.
How did you bring that? I want to get that.
Not turned on. And Sherry, to answer your question, that is the available cash in all of our current construction projects. It does include the cash available on the high school, but it also includes the residual value or the residual balance in our Southside cafeteria project and a few other small ones.
Okay. And how much has been spent to date on the new high school project, the partial high school?
We paid an invoice this past week. I would have to look that up. Give me just a moment and I can share that with you.
Thank you.
It changes. So.
Could you give us a breakdown of that item, of those items as well? Not just a number, but what each, a rough breakdown of that.
Yes.
Questions? Well, I guess I don't want to. Okay, we'll wait.
Mr. Hawkins may be able to answer my next question if you want to do that, Debbie.
Yeah, I feel like Amy's feeling pressure.
No, I don't feel pressure.
Okay.
Mr. Hawkins, I think that in last week's planning meeting, I heard Amy say that the cash from the capital outlay and the building funds could be attached to the revised BG1 in addition to the remaining construction funds. Is that correct?
I do know that the cash from the building fund can be included on the BG1. Yes, that is correct.
Okay. And then another question is just that knowing that our newest building is almost 15 years old, if we use all of our available cash on this partial high school project, how would it impact our bonding capacity for other potential needs, such as a new roof or HVAC unit?
I mean, obviously, if there's no cash, and it would depend somewhat on how much of the bonding potential is utilized. So if the BG1 is doesn't take the full amount of bonding, then whatever the difference is would be available for other projects. However, if the full amount were to be utilized, then we would have to grow that back over time to be able to utilize it if we were to have any big need, any bigger projects that may have to be addressed.
Okay. And I don't know if you can answer this or Amy, but what would happen if we did have an unexpected expense that we couldn't pay for out of our contingency if we're utilizing all of our available cash on this BG1?
Wouldn't be a good spot to be in if we had a project that was over the $4 million, obviously. That would be very significant, and obviously, I'm not sure what that next step might be. We would have to contact KDE to see what their advice would be for us moving forward if there was a project of that size.
Okay, I have numbers.
Oh, thank you.
So, of the $700,000 that was reported at the end of May, $658,000 of that is directly tied to the cash balance on the BG1 for the high school. Since May 31st, we have spent an additional $15,800 for architectural fees. So the current balance in that project is $642,000.
So that means we've spent how much?
So we have spent, to date $645,000 in total. The balance is $642,000 because the cash on hand was the $1.2 million that we moved into that project when it was approved in June.
Right, but we've spent, it sounds like almost half of that or a little
Okay.
So really we don't have that 1.2 anymore. We would have to find that extra money, this 645,000 somewhere else and put it back in because that's already been expended, it sounds like. Amy, do you have any idea what would happen if we had a need of like a roof replacement or a HVAC unit? Because all of our buildings, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think they're, our newest building is 15 or so years old already. So our newest building is just getting to that point in its life cycle where you are looking at significant repairs. But what would happen if we had an unexpected expense that we couldn't pay for if we attach all of our cash, so we don't have that, and we couldn't pay for out of contingency because we didn't have the sufficient funds?
So you're saying what would we do if we had no funds to pay for it?
Yeah, I mean, if we attach
no restricted dollar. Well, so one thing, we're 15 days or so away from next fiscal year, so we will get additional funds come July 1st. So hopefully, and perhaps some of those dollars could offset some of those costs. I mean, there's a lot of variables there in the extent of the repair, the extent of the need, and if that time come, we would have to do not only an analysis of where we stand in our funds, but also just what the options are, and if there's some cost-effective solutions for those situations.
Thank you. I mean, that really helps me understand why your recommendation and Mr. Hawkins' recommendation is to release the cash and rescind the BG1 and restore our budget back to a balanced state. Thank you.
Just to interject on that, on the thought of restoring the balance back to, or the budget back to a balanced state, with the budget, the tentative budget we approved last week, we are nowhere near a balanced budget. Even if we unrestricted every penny and stopped the high school project, we're not even close to a balanced budget. Is that correct, Ms. Smith?
So the tentative estimates that was given earlier this year, and the options that was also presented again last week when we talked about the tentative budget, those particular options were based on a lot of assumptions, things we still do not know. It was also, it included restrictions of these funds, not only the 600,000, but also the 350,000. Some of those are still undecided on how those are going to be utilized and exactly used, and if they're going to be used on the high school project or not. So it is correct that that proposal does.
It creates
still,
a budget deficit.
It still creates a deficit, and there's still a lot of unknowns. That is correct.
You know, looking at the email that you sent today, it
Which is just a snapshot of what was presented last week.
Sure, but that's a $2,964,366 deficit if we kept the $600,000 restricted, and if we unrestrict that 600, we're still looking at a deficit of $2,364,366.
Well,
So
keep in mind that the cumulative effect of $950,000 this year,
Sure.
in addition to another $950,000 next year. So, 1.9 million of that is directly tied to those two restrictions.
I think the other thing you have to keep in mind too, and we went over this very clearly at our March 10th budget work session, was that the difference between the operating cash and the contingency is included in those budgets. And we showed you that evening how we would end up with no deficit this year, and if there was a deficit next year, it would be very, very slight compared to what we're dealing with now.
Can you define very, very slight, please?
I mean, it could be in the, when we say slight, it's probably in the $200,000 range. So that is, that's something that can be, we can watch very, very closely and see how things progress throughout the course of the year. That's very different than, you know, $1 million or $1.6 million or $1.9 million. So
if I could further ask you a question, last week during your COVID presentation, every paragraph included the phrase, "But this will be very costly. We have no idea how much money we're talking about here."
mm-hmm.
So you said that 200,000 is slight. Don't you envision more expenses being necessary for the COVID-19 as you proposed?
That is absolutely the case, and that's why we have stated repeatedly that we have to put ourselves in the best financial position possible now to be able to deal with those unknowns. That has not changed.
Okay,
and so,
that has not changed. And we both agree that is extremely important right now to put ourselves in the best state to deal with those issues which we know are coming, but yet we don't know how bad it may be.
that is correct.
Is that true?
That is correct.
Then is your recommendation not to generate more revenue this year with the implementation of a tax increase? Does that contradict what you have just said?
I don't think it does. I think there is always a balance of district needs with community needs. And right now we are seeing things in our community that I have never seen in my lifetime. We've never seen unemployment at this rate. We've never seen businesses impacted this way. I've never seen a situation where people had home loan payments deferred, or utility bills deferred, or eviction notices deferred. I have never seen that. And And so,
And-
so let me finish that thought. And so to ask for an additional tax burden on our community, given those circumstances, I don't think is right. And so that is the balance that we have to strike in terms of putting ourselves in the best position possible without adding a burden that our community right now doesn't need.
Absolutely, and I think that you may be trying to get an argument that's not there. But noting all of that, noting that if you unrestrict all the money, if I'm understanding, you will have a slight deficit of 200,000.
Possibly,
You will have, do what?
possibly.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think like the salient point is that if we unrestrict and stop spending $645,000 a year and restricting 1.2 million, and unrestrict our capital funds request like last week that the superintendent recommended, it puts us on a balanced, more of a balanced budget. It truly is 1.2 that we put in last year, and we've spent half of it, and now we have to add it back to get it back to the 1.2. At some point, I think it just is just common sense that we can't take general fund money and set it aside for a building if we're saying that it's important to get our students entered back into school, if we're saying it's important to address these equity issues, if we're saying it's important for reentry, then we have to spend our money on those items, not saving it and setting it aside and then asking the taxpayers to give us another tax increase because the tax money they already gave us, we decided to set it aside for a school. We have to use it for our programs and for our students. And I think, Amy, her budgets have been clear. Mr. Hawkins has been clear in saying that if we rescind the CG1 and restore all the money, that will go a long way to making the balanced budget. And even if there are some slight deficits, they're deficits we can cover. They're deficits that we can work with versus what we have now by setting, the money aside on the CG1 that it still won't fund an entire school. So,
Well, the other reason I said possibly too, Mr. Wilson, is that this doesn't address the capital outlay dollars. And we've got funds there that have not been spent this year that could be utilized for some general fund expenditures, and we'll have funds next year that could be distributed into the general fund. So when I say it's a possibility, that's because we haven't even addressed those funds being utilized as well, which again, that may be a necessity. But again, that's still money that's available outside of the $950,000.
All right, is there any further discussion? Okay, we have a motion and a second on the floor to accept the May financial report. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All right, the motion passes 5-0. The next item on the agenda is opportunity for audience public comment. Do we have any of that, Mr. Hawkins?
Yes, we do.
All right, I missed it last time. Somebody reading those?
Ms. Bailey will be reading each of those.
Okay.
Are we ready?
It might be good for all of us to mute our mics so that we're not interfering with the sound.
Okay.
And we need to wait for Debbie to rejoin the meeting. Just one moment. There we go.
We good?
Yes.
Okay. Angela McHale, to the Woodford County School Board. I am writing today to ask for your reconsideration in restricting funds from the next school year's budget in order to build a new high school. In my opinion, it is reckless to continue to consider anything other than postponing any discussion of a new building until the current pandemic is under control and underlying economic issues created from it are resolved. Our kids need teachers, counselors, staff, and resources like our meal services more than a building. We should not be so willing to sacrifice one for the other. Again, asking for reconsideration and a complete reversal on restricting funds for capital, which creates budget deficits that cannot be overcome without cutting critical programs, resources, and support that our children deserve. We owe this to them. You owe this to them. This is not a question of raising taxes or cutting costs. It's a simple stop to the capital crusade that this board seems determined to execute at the expense of our outstanding district. Please hear your community and act appropriately. Respectfully, Angela McHale, Woodford County resident, mother of a yellow jacket and a tiger. Sarah McCowan. This comment speaks to the agenda item requesting yet another list of proposed budget cuts from Superintendent Hawkins. First, I'm completely against spending taxpayer dollars to hire a financial consultant. We have the resources necessary to make those decisions already. There is no dispute that Mrs. Smith is highly respected throughout the state as an expert in school finance. We have folks from Baird who we pay to provide bonding capacity advice. I liken this request to what we saw from the board several months ago when they hired separate legal counsel to deal with superintendent issues. I suppose it's possible to pay someone to tell you what you want to hear, but is that fiscally responsible and good stewardship of taxpayer dollars? I think not. It all comes down to priorities. The quality and performance of Woodford County schools are what draws people to this community. No doubt we need a building that reflects that same quality. However, making significant cuts to people and programs less than a month before the start of school, all while keeping general fund dollars restricted for a new building, is reckless. I'm asking the board not to support any resolution that would lead to making general funds unavailable, because we have seen its correlation to deficit budgets, and it does not make sense as we face so many unknowns as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. Respectfully submitted, Sarah McCowan. Aaron Heim. Before voting on the BG1 this evening, many members I have spoken with in the community would like the board to answer these two questions. 1, what are we building? 2, what is the projected cost? Aaron Heim. Gay Fugate. Board members. Last week it was disheartening to see 4 board members vote against Sherry Springgate's motion of designated any restricted dollars for staff raises. Tonight's vote on the resolution to restrict general fund money will reveal the board's real priorities. How could the board vote no to a potential staff raise last week, then turn around and vote yes this week for a phased high school? Please know your actions speak much louder than your words. Gay Fugate. From Aaron Casimir, music teacher at Northside and 2002 WCHS graduate. As a current Woodford County teacher of 12 years and a former student who attended Woodford County schools from kindergarten through 12th grade, as well as a mother of a soon-to-be second grader, I feel like it is my responsibility to speak up and make my voice heard. We are about to embark on a school year like no other, as teachers, parents, and students. We have no idea what sorts of expenses may come up as we go through these uncharted territories. Will there be needs for new curriculums, new technology, more staff, more classroom furniture that can be physically distanced? We have no idea yet. What we do know is it will be different, and we, teachers, parents, and students, need your support like we never have before. The way the last year has gone makes me question the support and the motive of the board. This is not the time to be having ridiculous financial discussions about restricting funds. This is a time to be talking about how all funds can be used to best serve our students and teachers. I implore you, unrestrict the funds you have restricted and do not restrict any more funds, which are almost certainly going to be needed as we enter into the most unknown year imaginable. Thank you, Aaron Casimir. Candy Neal. My comment addresses the financial matters on this evening's agenda. Several hours after the June 4th special session, a social media post surfaced from a community member who happens to be the opponent of Sherry Springate in the upcoming school board election. The community member's post states it is a synopsis of what occurred at the June 4th special meeting. However, there are many discrepancies between the post and what actually occurred during the meeting. The post states, quote, "The restricted $600,000 repeatedly being referenced in ongoing budget meeting was designated for 1 year only, which was 2 years ago after the tax hike loss." End quote. This information was not provided in the June 4th special meeting. I have watched or attended every board meeting. Last Monday was the first time issues surrounding the $600,000 restriction was discussed. I know for a fact it was not mentioned during the June 4th session. How did this community member receive this information before everyone else? The post also states, quote, "He, Attorney Salisbury, advised an outside auditor be brought in to review financial records and provide financial advice." End quote. Advice from attorney is typically privileged and confidential information. An attorney was never mentioned during the June 4th meeting. How did this community member know about Attorney Salisbury's advisement? Additionally, the post states, quote, "Bradley appropriately contacted Edelin, the board chair. Both Bradley and Edelin conversed with board attorney Salisbury." Once again, this information was never mentioned during the special meeting. How did this person know Mrs. Bradley and Mrs. Edelin conversed with board attorney Salisbury? Since it is obvious the communication between Attorney Salisbury and the board was shared with Mrs. Springate's opponent, I submitted an open records request to see if I could also see the information. Although my request was denied, I was able to verify that a privileged communication between the board and Attorney Salisbury related to the information in this community member's post does exist. Over the past year, Mrs. Springate has not been treated as an equal on this board, but to think a board member would leak privileged and confidential information to help her opponent is troubling to me, and I'm sure to the community as well. Thank you, Candy Neal. Stephanie Wells. The agenda this evening is troublesome. It appears the board will be voting on resolutions to restrict fund dollars for a new high school, which will no doubt lead to deficit spending. Then, you are asking Mr. Hawkins to make budget cuts to balance the budget with one caveat. Don't touch the money set aside for the new high school. This speaks volumes about the board's priorities. It's okay to cut programs and services from our kids when they need them the most, but it is not okay to cut restricted funds for a new high school. The community will be watching to see how each individual board member votes this evening. Your decisions will provide great insight into your integrity and character. Chad Wells. Allow me to share a few facts with you this evening before posing a question for the board. Fact number 1. In fiscal year 2019, the district operated with a $1 million deficit. Fact 2. An approximate $1 million deficit is projected for the current year. Fact 3. An even larger deficit is projected for fiscal year 2021. Fact 4. We are facing unprecedented economic uncertainty, not only in our community, but in our state and in our nation. Fact 5. If we are allowed to return to school in August, our students will have been out of school for 5 months, a situation which we have never faced in our lifetimes. Fact 6. Undoubtedly, additional resources will be needed to meet students' needs when school opens in the fall. Now my question. Why would the board think now is the right time to restrict general fund dollars and ask for over $2 million in cuts to programs and services given these startling facts? I hope you will explain your reasoning as decisions are made this evening. Thanks, Chad Wells. Jeff Reed. My comments are related to the resolutions to restrict funds for a new high school. The board's decisions to restrict general fund dollars over the past 2 years have led to deficit spending. Still, here we are tonight, with the board considering yet another restriction, even though there is a substantial deficit projected for the next fiscal year. Additionally, the state budget is facing a significant shortfall, which will most likely impact school districts in the coming year. Also, Mr. Hawkins outlined several potential costs last week pertaining to the reopening of school in the fall. Given these 3 facts, along with maintaining a flat tax rate next year, I can't understand the logic behind restricting any general funds at this time. Prior to voting on this item this evening, I am calling on the board to provide a full explanation of where the money will come from and the potential ramifications of this decision. This is particularly important as 3 board seats are up for election in November. It doesn't seem fair that a new board taking office in January would inherit financial difficulty created by this board. I'm hoping you will do the right thing this evening and set the new high school aside and focus on our most pressing need, the return to school in the fall. Thank you, Jeff Reed. Karen Brock, Board of Education members, concerning item L on the regular agenda. I am begging you to vote against continuing to restrict funds as was voted on in 2018. Yes, it was voted on that year, but it is not required that a current board continue to do so. With all of the unknowns for the coming years and other budget income in question, seek funds, etc., I do not believe it is wise to stretch the budget further than it can go, and lowering the contingency fund to get a new school is not a good decision. That buffer is needed for unforeseen future expenditures. And item N. Mr. Hawkins cannot cut budgets with all the unknowns out there, especially by the required date given. That gives him less than 1 month to implement all the state requirements to open the school and determine all costs for these changes. That is impossible. Please back off of a new school and unrestrict all money toward the new school until all the new requirements to reopen can be put into place and evaluated for their effectiveness. Our kids need the board to put them first. Get them through the upcoming school year. That is the only thing that matters right now. Thank you, Karen Brock. Latha Reed. Board members, last week the public learned both the $600,000 and $350,000 resolutions were deemed invalid. This news is not surprising given the board's behavior over the past year. While I don't fully understand all the issues surrounding the $600,000 resolution, I am fully aware of what happened with the $350,000 resolution. I'd like to take this opportunity to explain how this resolution was passed. Last September, the board voted to raise taxes to generate more revenue. Before taking the tax increase, the board never mentioned the possibility of restricting additional tax dollars for a new high school. However, immediately after the vote, at the very next meeting, a motion was made to restrict additional general fund dollars. That motion was tabled after the board agreed to host a public forum to get public input on funding options for a new high school. However, that agreement was broken in October when another board member, unbeknownst to anyone, placed a $350,000 restriction on the agenda the Friday before the action meeting was going to be held on Monday, October 28, 2019, a month after the board agreed to table the restriction until after the forum. The $350,000 restriction passed on a 3-2 vote, with Danny Bradley, Allison Richardson, and Ambrose Wilson voting for, and Debbie Edelin and Sherry Springate voting against. Additionally, the evening of the meeting, a motion was made to advance the restriction on the agenda ahead of the discussion pertaining to the forum. After the restriction was approved, the board learned it did not have $350,000 of available cash within the operating budget. To cover this expense, immediate cuts had to be made or it had to be taken from the contingency fund. The following month, the board voted to move $350,000 from the district's contingency fund to cover the restriction approved in October. Is it surprising to anyone that the $350,000 restriction was deemed invalid given the manner in which it was approved? While the board's actions may have been legal, they were far from ethical. Tonight, I see a very similar situation about to unfold. Last week, Mrs. Edelin asked at least 3 times if any board member wanted to put a $600,000 resolution on the agenda. No one said a word. Mrs. Edelin went on to say the $600,000 resolution would not appear on tonight's agenda. Funny how nobody wanted the agenda item last week, but it is on the agenda this evening. It is actions such as these that have led the community to lost trust in this board. Thank you, Latha Reed. That's it.
Thank you, Elaine. Okay, the next item on the agenda is, we're up to our consent agenda. Does any member want an item removed or considered separately on the consent agenda? All right, do we have a motion to approve the consent agenda? Okay, we don't have a motion to
I think
consent.
everybody's still muted.
Yeah.
Okay,
Sherry said so moved.
okay.
Thank you.
We have a motion by Ms. Springate. Is there a second?
Mr. Wilson.
Okay, we have a motion by Ms. Springate, a second by Mr. Wilson. Is there any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, the consent agenda is approved 5-0. Now we move to our regular agenda. Accept notification of personnel matters.
So moved.
We have a motion by Mr. Wilson. Is there a second?
Second.
A second by Ms. Springate. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
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 All opposed? Accept notifications of personnel matters is a pass 5-0. Item B, accept notification of payment of bills.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Wilson and a second by Ms. Springate. Is there any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Item B passes 5-0. Next, we have to approve the minutes of May 11th, 2020 at 5 p.m. and May 11th, 2020 at 6 p.m. board meetings.
So moved.
We have a Sherry, did you second?
Yes.
Okay, I have a motion by Mr. Wilson and a second by Ms. Springate. Is there any discussion?
Miss Evelyn,
All in favor say aye.
Miss Evelyn, just a reminder, you wouldn't need to vote on this one.
I think that's the
I'm not voting
Oh,
on
I'm
item D.
sorry.
Yeah,
I got
okay.
one ahead. I'm sorry.
That's fine. All right, so all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, item C passes 5-0. Next, we have approved meeting minutes of the May 18th, 2020 board meeting. This is the one that I will not vote on.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Wilson and a second by Ms. Springate. Is there any discussion? All in favor say aye.
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 All opposed? Motion passes 4-0. Item E, the bond of the depository. I believe Mr. Hawkins talked about this last week.
So moved.
Sorry.
Move to approve.
Okay, we have a motion by Mr. Wilson,
Second.
second by Ms. Springate. Is there any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes 5-0. Item F is the treasurer's fidelity bond.
Move we approve.
Second.
I have a motion by Mr. Wilson and a second by Ms. Springate. Is there any discussion? All in favor say aye.
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 All opposed? Motion passes 5-0. Item G, BG4 Woodford County High School Cooling Tower Replacement Project, BG number 19-274.
Move we approve.
Second.
I have a motion by Mr. Wilson and a second by Ms. Springate. Is there any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes 5-0. Item H, the school year 2020-2021 one-to-one device program fees.
So I move we approve.
Second.
I have a motion by Mr. Wilson and a second by Ms. Springate. Is there any discussion? All in favor say aye.
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 All opposed? Motion passes 5-0. Item I, bid renewals for student pictures, waste removal, and yearbook.
Move we approve.
Second.
Have a motion by Mr. Wilson and a second by Ms. Springate. All in favor, or is there any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes 5-0. All right, now we're at the portion of the agenda where I'm going to move things around a little bit. I want to start with what is listed on the agenda as item L. Renew the resolution restricting funds for new high school construction. Resolution approved September 24th, 2018, restricting general funds of $600,000.
Madam Chairperson, I move we do not approve that. Unrestrict the money and release the $600,000 into the general fund to be used for whatever purposes the board deems necessary.
Second.
Okay, so it sounds like we have a motion to not renew the resolution restricting funds for new high school construction. Resolution approved September 24th, 2018, restricting general fund for $600,000. So everybody understands that the motion is to not renew this. Is there any discussion? Okay, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Hold on, Sherry was speaking.
That's okay. I was just going to say I seconded this motion, and I do vote aye.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry, did I not say the motion was by Mr. Wilson and the second was by Ms. Springate?
I just wanted to make sure that a motion.
Okay, yeah, I may have missed saying that. We'll got to take care of Angel here. So, all right, so no discussion. So all in favor of not renewing the resolution restricting funds for the new high school construction of $600,000 that was adopted on September 24th, 2018, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Motion passes 5-0. The resolution will not be renewed. All right, now let's go to item K on your agenda.
Before we move on, can I just clarify? I also heard Mr. Wilson say that we would release those funds.
Well, I think by not renewing this, they will go back into the general fund.
I think that's automatic.
Yeah, because.
Okay. Wanted to clarify.
Yes. That's
Because
my
there's
understanding.
a question on the next few agenda items also.
Okay, so that's the intention of the board, I believe.
Thank you.
So item K on your agenda we'll go to next. Consider resolution to restrict general fund revenue for FY 1920 and amend or replace all prior related resolutions for 1920. Is there a motion?
Can you explain this again, Mrs.?
Yeah, okay, I will explain this. I know Ms. Mersick, like I said, was not able to be with us. As you know, we realized that the $600,000 resolution that we did in 2018 was only for the school year 2018-19. We have just voted not to renew that. The reason that happened, my understanding is that the board was always talking about restricting it going forward, but that the bond attorney, and everybody should have received a letter that bond attorney wrote to us, said that it was best practice to only do these resolutions for 1 year at a time. When we did the $350,000 resolution last fall, we did it for, it was, the language in it indicated that it would be ongoing year after year. Because we've now gotten this opinion from the bond attorney that it's best practice to do them 1 year at a time. The motion is to amend the $350,000 resolution that we did last October, or actually we're doing a new resolution. And it will be what it was last October, except that it will be for just fiscal year 1920. We could also amend the amount tonight if we wanted, but that's the backstory of this. Mr. Hawkins or anyone else who's read this or talked to anybody wants to add or correct me, let me know. But I believe that's the situation that this motion, the context of this motion.
Debbie, this is Sherry. I just had a few things. One thing is that obviously I don't believe we should be restricting any general fund dollars for a building project when we have so many needs. And I think it's clear through public comment and through the forum that the public agrees with that. But also I would point out that even though it might be legal to do this restriction, for the next fiscal year. I don't think it's really fair considering that we have 3 board seats up for election in November, and I don't think it would be fair to them to inherit the deficits left behind as a result of this action. And then a second point is just that I really think that Amy and Mr. Hawkins have been clear that in order to balance this budget, in order to give us a chance to spend our funds on our students, our programs, and our staff, we have to unrestrict these funds.
Okay, and that brings up another thing that you all received as your on your agenda package, which I did not address when I was giving the backstory. The bond attorney did include 2 resolutions for us. One for this year for 1920, and he went ahead and prepared one for the fiscal year 2021 as well. So this motion will consider 2 agenda items. So let's talk about the resolution for 1920 first. That is our current fiscal year. We did restrict the money for this current fiscal year. All this resolution amendment on this specific thing is doing is limiting it to this current fiscal year as opposed to the original language, which made it ongoing. And again, that was because of his recommendation that while it didn't make the amendment or the resolution illegal, it's just best practice to do that.
Yeah.
So I just want to make sure, because there's 2 pieces to this. The first part there, the consider resolution to restrict general fund revenue for FY 1920. That is what you're asking is the restriction that was done in October of 2019 that was going to be in each fiscal year. You're saying the 350 for this year only? Is that the first part of this?
Right,
resolution?
It would amend the language in the resolution, and I believe the resolution says, I've got it right in front of me, I'm sure everybody's read it. The resolution said that it would supersede any other resolution. So if we adopt this tonight, so it's only for 1920, then that supersedes the resolution that we did in October of 19.
And just to be clear, Debbie, I just want to reiterate that we did not have that money in our operating expenses. We had to take it out of our savings or contingency. That money was not.
We're clear on your position on that. I understand that.
Okay, I just.
So there's 2 parts to this. Let's and Grant, please jump in, okay? I believe that the first motion should be to consider a resolution for fiscal year 2019-20 and amend and replace all prior related resolutions to 1920, just that year. And I would make that motion. And I would make that we amend it by we amend it to conform to what the bond attorney has sent us in the last week or so, which the resolution that only restricts the money for 1920. Now you will notice in that resolution, he's also left it blank, the amount. So we could also make an amendment to that. So I'm going to make the motion that we adopt resolution sent by the attorney for 1920 in the amount of $350,000. And that we, by adopting this resolution, we are in fact negating and superseding the resolution of October 19. And the only difference that this is really making is changing it to a 1 year as opposed to the language that just says that it goes on year after year. Do you agree with that, Grant?
That's what I understand the bond attorney to have advised, yes.
Okay. So my motion is to adopt the 1920 bond resolution from the bond attorney with an amount of $350,000 restricted. Is there a second?
I second your motion.
I do have a question.
Yes, please.
Since we don't have that money in our operating expenses, where would it come from? Where would you get that?
I believe in January, Mr. Hawkins said that would come from the contingency.
Well, I think
So
we
if
should
you work through our budget, we'll,
work on that because we're clearly operating under about $1 million deficit right now. So we don't have the $350,000 to take out. And so I think we should be really clear about where you're going to find that money or where you're going to take it from. And then, you know, I just think that's something we should talk about before we vote.
And I think that would be a good thing for Ms. Smith and Mr. Hawkins to weigh in on. The discussion earlier that if the money was unrestricted, that it would negate the deficit of $2.9 million. So if we've just unrestricted the $600,000, the question I asked earlier today was, can you tell me the total amount you project as a deficit with the flat rate tentative budget? And then can you give me that number without the $600,000?
Yeah, and to be clear, we're talking about the budget for this year and then the budget for next year. So those are two different budgets. So
Okay.
it's not just 600,000. I think, and Amy, you've explained this well.
Okay, but the answer was that it would be 2.964 or 2.
So, Ms. Bradley, when you asked that question, I did not know at that point in time that the board's intent was to reverse the $600,000 for this year. So, if the deficit is 2.9 next year, and the only change is removing the $600,000 from next year, that makes it the 2.3. The motion that was just passed will obviously alleviate an additional $600,000. I do have a question though about this resolution. It specifically says that it is to be used towards debt service on bonds, and we do not have any debt service for this high school at this point in time. So I wanted to clarify the purpose of this resolution, so that I would know how to account for this.
Okay.
You know, I was hoping Kelly would be here. She's kind of been the one talking to the bond attorney. I did notice and Grant, maybe I'll direct your attention to this. If you look at the whereas, the second whereas clause on the first page, it says the board has determined that the dedicated sources of revenue for payment of the cost of such construction projects or debt service on bonds. But then in the actual resolution language, it says for the construction projects and to make necessary lease payments to the corporation by the corporation toward debt services on bonds.
And that's the statement I was referring to. Thank you.
Right. So in a way, I think that's almost contradicted. I think that, what do you think of that, Grant? Is this money going to be restricted only for bond payments, or could it go into building cash?
If I knew this area of the law, you wouldn't need a bond attorney.
No. I'm sorry. I was thinking Kelly was going to and I'm not blaming it on Kelly. She's gone above and beyond the duties here.
I just don't want to misspeak on that. I really, those words may as well just be swimming around on page in a foreign language to me when you ask that type of question.
Ms. Edelin, there is a current resolution previously adopted by the board to set aside $350,000, correct? Each
Yes.
year? Okay. If you withdraw your motion, I withdraw my second, and we can just leave it the way it is.
Until we get this matter clarified?
Yes.
Okay.
You withdraw your motion?
Yes.
I withdraw my second.
Do you agree with that, Grant? Then we'll just try to, I just wonder about the timing of this, if we need to get this done before June 30th.
Without this being a replacement for the resolution that took place in October of 2019, doesn't it mean that motion still, or that resolution is still valid?
Yes.
Yeah, and he did say in his letter, he doesn't think that it is necessarily illegal. I can't remember what the letter said. It was almost more of a best practice type thing. I do want to get it in the best, tightest, what the best way is, but I agree. Let's get this nailed down. Kelly was really kind of, for the other board members, I didn't realize we had a bond attorney. They really worked with us through Baird, our bonding agency. They are not paid, and their fee is kind of paid once we pay Baird, once we issue bonds. So that's kind of why we were not aware of this person, or at least I wasn't. Amy may have been. So we can clear it up and make sure that we're all comfortable with it. Just to be clear in this discussion, I guess my idea was that if we restricted this 350, it could be used for bond payments, or it could just be in the building fund, and going towards the high school, but didn't necessarily just be extra cash or something. Is that what the other people or Amy, go ahead.
No, Ms. Edlin, it's my understanding that specifically was restricted to be a restriction within the general fund. So what you're going to see at the end of the year is that since it was not applied to any particular construction project, because at this point we just set it aside, it will remain as a restricted dollar amount in our general fund for a future consideration, is the way I understood that.
The original resolution? Are you talking about the original?
I'm talking about the original resolution in late 2019.
But to answer Ms. Bradley's question, the money was moved from the contingency. And so if this amendment is done, the money would still be taken out of the contingency, because that's where we had to move it from in order to cover it. So that won't change whether you make it 1 year.
I'll go ahead, Mr. Hawkins.
So whether you make it a 1 year restriction, or whatever you decide to do, if it remains a restriction, that money has been moved from the contingency, and that's where it will have to be taken from this year.
Okay. But as far as, okay, so Amy, you were saying because it has not been applied to any particular building project, although the intent was always for that to go towards the high school, it's still going to sit in the general fund as of June 30?
As a restricted, yes, restricted for future construction.
Okay.
And then this is Sherry. I just have one final point. So by leaving this restricted, we know that it leads to deficit spending. It did last year, it will this year, it will next year. And then it looks like just a few items later, we're going to ask Mr. Hawkins about cutting our programs and services to cover this restriction. Could someone please explain that to me?
Yeah, I'll explain it when we get to that part of the motion.
Yeah, I think the motion has been withdrawn. I will clarify this. Ms. Smith, thank you for pointing that out. I actually kind of noticed that myself today when I was rereading it. And then again, we just don't have the people here that can make us feel really comfortable with this. So we'll remove this motion right now. The original resolution of October 2018, because we're not doing this tonight, is still in effect, at least for this year. And we'll go forward with that and then address this in a clearer way, because we do want these to be precise and to really show what the intent of the board was. All right, so now we're up to item J, amend the BG1 for New Woodford County High School, BG 19353. Everybody should have had 2 BG1s attached to their agenda item for this week, for this agenda item. I know that Ms. Smith and Ms. Mersick worked on these together. Do you want to tell us briefly, Ms. Smith, just the kind of nuts and bolts of the difference between these two, if you don't mind?
Sure. So there is one that is labeled a revised BG1 with no additional cash in hand. And basically what it does is it maintains the same project cost as the original BG1, so it's $36 million. But because we have more bonding potential today than we did when this was actually approved, it is moving the bonding obligation to those restricted dollars instead of the general fund. So it is just simply a shift of how the project will be funded, and it will not include any requirement for the general fund to bond anything for this project. The second option is essentially the exact same, I'm sorry, scratch that last statement. It is not the exact same. Is a revised BG1 is what I intended to say. It is lowering the amount of the general fund restriction to $350,000, but it is also fully utilizing what our current bonding potential is as of today, and it does increase the overall project cost to $45.3 million. So that's the two differences.
Okay. And then, so this looks like two options, and with the issue with the language in the resolution, I was thinking there was a third option, but that might, right tonight, isn't really an option until we clear up the language in the resolution for 350. And that was that we could do the one that leaves the project cost at 36 million, still restrict the 350,000, but just put it in, leave it, like you said, as restricted in the general fund or just in cash in the building fund if it's moved over. Do you consider that an option?
Well, if since the last motion was not acted upon, and the $350,000 that was restricted back in October still is valid, if you were to approve the first option that I described, in keeping the project cost at $36 million and just shifting the method in which we are paying from the general fund to the our current bonding, our restricted dollars, I think you would still achieve that same goal that you just explained.
Okay. And I think the only trick is because the language in the resolution that we did not adopt tonight says it was limited to debt payment, or it seemed to be confusing with that. And in this $36 million BG1, we don't need that money for debt payment. So that's what I was talking about, like.
Right. In the $36 million option, we do not need any general fund monies to support that particular revision.
So, but I was thinking, if we got the language of the resolution to be clear that this is allowed, we could still restrict 350 and just put it in cash in the building. Do you see what I mean?
I guess I would ask, does this need to be tabled until that other resolution is completely clear?
I think we can make that resolution do what we want it to do. We just have to make sure we have the language before us.
To Danny's point, it might make sense to get your resolutions done before you have them attached to a BG1 and the BG1 predicated on resolutions that we haven't really approved. Yeah, that might make
Amy, what is your understanding of the time frame of amending this BG1?
Well, I think that we have I think that since the board has chosen to remove the $600,000 restriction, which our original BG1 includes that, I would recommend that you proceed with the option one that does keep the project at the same level, but it removes the restriction on the general fund, and this can still be amended in the future as things evolve and we get more information.
Okay. But we know that no matter what happens, even if we don't get back to this resolution or whatever, we do have $350,000 from this year. The bond attorney's letter said that the fact that it was ongoing did not make it null for this year at least. So where would that 350 be? In
Well,
the option of the BG1, it would still be restricted in the general fund. Would it ever move over to the building fund?
No, not unless the board acted upon that. Right now, that is not included in either of these BG1 options. That money is just restricted in the general fund and can be moved at a later time.
Okay. And that's why I wanted to amend it to just make it clear where our funding is coming from now. Because the 600 was in that original BG1 part of it. Because, we thought it was kind of ongoing. And so it was linked to the, what was going to pay a bond. We don't need it anymore.
Correct. So if
because the state funding has changed so much, we don't even need it.
I'm sorry.
So just to be cleaner, it would be better to make our funding reflect more accurately where it's coming from. So,
Debbie, I did want to say I have the bonding attorney's letter, and it says, I agree with Dirk's prior advice that the current board cannot bond a future board with respect to the annual set aside to the building fund for the new project. That doesn't mean it just goes on, but basically it's saying we should be binding future boards. So I do think that's something that needs to be cleaned up.
Right, and that's why we need to do it. But I think what it does go on to say, and that's what I was talking about this year, it does go on to say that does not mean that the more recent resolution authorizing an additional $350,000 is automatically void with respect to fiscal years after June 30, 2020.
Right.
So, and that was confusing to me too, because at first said, okay, all right. Let's think about how we should go forward. We're going to try to get our resolution so that we all understand it and that it really reflects the board's intent. And in my mind, and please discuss this with me, the intent is that if we restrict this 350, that it is not necessarily only to be used to pay bond payments. It's going to have some more flexibility within the project than that, because we have bond payments, we have cash. Is that correct?
I think the thing you want to consider with that, if it's only a 1-year restriction, it would just be for cash, because you wouldn't be making ongoing bond payments with that $350,000. So if it was done for the 1 year,
about that too.
Yeah.
Just kind of tell him what our intent is and see what he thinks the language should be.
I'm sorry, Scott, can you finish? And then I think Amy was going to speak earlier too, and it's terribly hard when two people talk at the same time.
Yeah, I was saying that if the 350 resolution is changed to this year only, it would be cash, because it's a one-time use of money. So you wouldn't obligate it to bond payments because you only have it for the 1 year. So it would be cash to be able to be utilized on the BG1, but there would be no ongoing obligation, so it couldn't be used for ongoing bond payments.
Okay, and how does that differ from the 600 being attached to the BG1 when we talked about this and said that it would be included every year because it was then attached to the BG1 as funding?
The board committed that as a general fund obligation in terms of bond payments and getting the bonding to that level. What you could potentially do is, instead of using capital outlay cash, you could use the $350,000. You could replace that so that the overall project is still $36.2 million. So it would be a substitution of the cash that's available on the BG1, whereas that was committed as part of the general fund bond sale, the $600,000. So there's a big difference between committing it for a bond sale and committing it as far as cash goes.
Okay.
Debbie, I just had a couple of other questions.
But wait a minute, Danny, did you think, Amy, did you have something that you were trying to say?
No, I did not.
Okay. Ms. Springate?
Yes, I was going to say that I really believe we need to fill out the scope part of this, this BG1 a little bit more clearly, just so that the scope describes what we're building. And I think that's just going to be really important for the public to have that as a whole document. And then the last thing, I was wondering if Amy could just go over on both BG1s, the financial plan for that with the different costs. Could we start with the one where there's the restriction of the $350,000?
So, yes, so if we proceed with the restriction of a $350,000, the project cost is a little over $45 million. The total construction cost is estimated at $37 million. Required contingency of 5%, that's $1,850,000. The architect fee is $1.9 million. The construction manager fee is $993,000. The next couple of lines are directly tied to selling the bond for the discount and the fiscal agent fee of a little over, well, right at 1.1 million, those two to combined. It includes 1.4 million for furnishings and equipment, 270,000 for equipment and computers, 270,000 for our technology network. The site survey, 54,000, which that has already been completed, and the geotech investigation of 39,000, that also has already been completed. Additional special inspections of 281,000, commissioning of 95,000, printing of 40,000, and plan review fees of 24,000 for a total of the 45.3 million.
And then right above that, it has that the new high school estimated cost is $46,614,000.
Right above that.
Above the scope. So the scope says new high school phase 1, and then I guess the cost, estimated cost of a new high school would be $46 million, which is more than this BG1 of $45 million.
And Mr. Locke, I think, is on this call, but that estimated cost, I thought was total project cost. Mr. Locke, is that not correct?
Yeah, the only thing that I was given was the page 2 of the BG1, so I'm not really sure what Ms. Springate is referring to. So just the $37 million is the construction cost. That's at the very top left of the second page of the BG1.
If I can interrupt, the $46,614,000 and change is the estimated cost that was contained on the 2017 district facility plan. That was the predicted cost of the new high school when the facility plan was adopted and approved by KDE.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Do you know what the current estimated cost for a new high school is, and should we update this?
That section, at least, is just intended, as I understand it, to just be reflective of what the DFP says. So that specific line item that you're looking at that says DFP approval date, DFP priority level, estimated cost, all of that, until you revise the facility plan, that section between those two horizontal bars, I think that stays the same.
That is correct.
It would be nice if we could update that and know what the estimates for a new high school. I know, Kevin, you sent something out to us not long ago. What was that number?
For the KDE estimate,
or just the estimate that you gave us for a full high school? I guess that's what this is asking. It's not asking for phased, right, Amy?
Well, no.
It's asking for the DFP approved amount.
Right. So when you do the district facility plan, that's taking the number from KDE for the property insurance, which is I think $254 and change per square foot. And that's going by the KDE square footage allowable for the high school to come up with what the number is. That's the number that's included for the new high school in the district facility plan.
I understand that, but what is your estimate for us to get a full high school? Your last estimate that you sent us, what was that number?
What are you considering a full high school?
I think you sent a couple of different options. One you labeled a full high school, one you labeled with bids or with alternates. I'm talking about just the full high school, that we could get a complete high school with the bids included, the total amount of that.
So what we sent you all was 3 different options. The first option is the one that we've been working on today. That's roughly $41 million for the base bid construction cost. And then we earmarked a total of, if you look at the total estimated construction cost with the alternates, was $44.6 million.
Okay, and what did that include? Was that the 10th through 12th grade center or the full school?
That's the full high school with the competition gym. The alternates were the 4 alternates, including the auditorium, geothermal HVAC system, the greenhouse, and the track and practice field were the 4 alternates that were identified in that particular option.
Okay, and then what was the 10th through 12th grade center you?
Okay, so that one right now is listed at $36.5 million, and that is including another alternate in addition to the alternates I just talked about, which is for classroom building, basically taking having an alternate in there that takes it from 1,000 student academic to a 1,350 academic. Both of option 2 would include all of the core spaces for 1,350. So that alternate gives you another $4.4 million construction cost as far as the classroom addition. So $36.5 million roughly is where you are with the 1,000 academic 1,350 core spaces, with alternates in there for another approximately $8 million to get you back up to everything that we just discussed in option number 1.
Okay. I'm not sure that we should be doing this tonight either. Let's get our resolution in place. Let's make sure our bonding agent is here, although I know that Amy and her work quickly and know these questions, but some of these questions about the resolution we need to do. I just need to be clear on any kind of time limit on this. So Amy, if you or Scott, think of any time limits, and we can I know that we're going to have another meeting this month about back to school. Maybe we can have some of the questions that have been risen tonight, we'll have some firmer answers for that and can add that on before June 20th. So I'm making a motion that we table this item.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
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 All opposed? Motion passes 5-0. Item M, direct the superintendent to provide proposed budget reductions not including or interfering with construction of a new high school to balance the budget with a contemplated flat tax rate. Such proposed reduction shall be provided to the board by July 13th, 2020. Do you have a motion on it?
Madam Chairperson, I asked that to be put on the agenda because last week when the superintendent recommended that we keep the tax rate flat for the next year and 4 of us agreed, I felt that might lead to deficit, but the superintendent has expressed it could maybe lead to a slight deficit, very manageable. So I like to withdraw my agenda item.
Just to clarify, when I said something about the slight deficit, that was also not, unrestricting the 350. So if just that has to be kept in mind as well. That wasn't just the 600.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay.
I would like this agenda item to stay on.
Okay.
I believe that, and I know we've been told that, we were told before the pandemic that all of our woes would be gone if we unrestricted everything. Since the pandemic, logic dictates to me that we would need to unrestrict everything and to have additional cuts. The budget option that we voted on last week, I believe Danny just mentioned it, showed a $2.3 million deficit with a flat tax rate. I know that, you know, we now are restricting 350 this year. I understand that we've restricted things in the past. We looked for a capital funds request that did not happen. I'm unclear if that's going to be necessary next year with a flat tax rate. While we, you know, we've had objection to using general funds to pay for building, I think it's just as dangerous to get into the habit of using building funds to pay for bills that have almost always been paid out of general fund. So I really want a clear understanding of these expenses. Mr. Hawkins, if you think that the deficit would only be a couple $100,000 with these things unrestricted, show us that option as well. I know you're going to say you've done it before, but I do not believe that we've really concentrated on a flat tax rate. I know that when the forecasts went around last fall to all the schools, it was really based on a 4%. Everything we have said was with a 4%. I know that we need to be sensitive to the needs of our community members. This has been something we've done in the past to set up for a nickel tax cut, which would actually increase by much further our constituents' tax rates. So I would still want to leave this on, and I will make this motion.
Okay.
Is there a second?
I'm sorry.
What?
I said I will second that to get to discussion. I'd like to let Mr. Hawkins have a chance to respond on that and clarify.
Discussion.
I'm sorry.
I also had some discussion.
Okay, discussion. We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion?
Yes, we literally just spent, and we've spent many meetings discussing this. The deficit, Amy has shown us on paper, Mr. Hawkins has shown us on paper, is something that's very manageable if we unrestrict all the funds we have set aside for the new high school. That includes the cash, and that is for multiple years. So I think that's one important thing to kind of keep in mind. And the other thing is, if you believe that we have a deficit, and it's clear that we do because we have the negative budget sheets to prove it. So if you believe we have a deficit and you know that we have this deficit, why are we still trying to restrict funds to set aside for a new school? And again, with taxes, you know, I don't know how you can ask taxpayers to pay higher taxes or a higher percentage of taxes when you're taking their money that they've given us over the past few years and setting it aside or restricting it for a new building. I think that, you know, in good conscience, it really is an economic crisis. We really do have a pandemic. We really should be utilizing all of our funds for reentry of our students, for our staff, for our programs. And to say, Mr. Hawkins, we know you've told us that your recommendation is that we should not cut our programs, we should not cut our staff, we should simply stop restricting money for this school, stop spending our cash on this school, stop restricting our cash for this new high school, this partial high school. And so I feel like he's really made that recommendation over and over again. At some point, the board has to decide either we listen to that recommendation or we just go out there and say, you know what, the taxpayers will keep handing it out if we keep our hands out, we're not gonna pay our bills, we're gonna do deficit spending. Last year, deficit spending.
Sherry, you were corrected last week that we're not gonna pay our bills. Ms. Smith,
No, I was not.
have we not paid any of our bills?
Deficit spending means you are
Ms.
not using your
Smith.
taxes you received this year. You are not, that's a deficit of $1 million in spending. I was not corrected. Amy, if you could clarify, please.
Ms. Smith, have we not paid any bills? Have there been any bills we have not paid this year?
That's not deficit spending, Debbie. If you could let Amy explain what deficit spending.
I'm asking her, you just said we're not paying our bills. You just said that, Sherry. I
Not
maybe you don't know what you said, but you did.
If you have deficit spending, that means you are using your contingency, which we already spoke about tonight. That means you are using your other funds and you're setting them aside. The tax funds, we didn't even have enough to cover the $350,000 restriction last year. So you know good and well we don't have it to cover it this year or for the next 20 years. I feel like you're not being honest about what budgeting is. If we are deficit spending to the tune of $1 million last fiscal year, $1 million or more this fiscal year, and we're projected to be a couple $1 million short next year, deficit spending is not a good idea when you have the funds to pay those bills, but you choose not to because you're restricting it and setting it aside for a high school. That is my point, and I don't believe.
I think part of the issue here is just the taxpayers pay us money to run the school district. Running the school district also includes providing adequate, safe facilities that provide the environment for their children to go out into the world, to provide them exposure to things they will see when they go out in the world. That is part of it. And to paint the high school as a waste, it's just a difference. It's just a difference of opinion or priority. That's all it is. It's not, Sherry, we give you so much time. Please let me finish.
And I'll respond.
So I think that's important to kind of all bring everybody back in the community. We're not building a shrine to ourselves. We're building something that everybody in this community says we needed. We're building something that's only going to get more expensive. We may have an opportune time here where construction costs go down, but that's against the trend. We are looking. We don't need a nickel to build this high school. We don't need what we needed before because conditions are better. We're trying to take advantage of that and look at it. We're not trying to bankrupt the school. We're not trying to hurt the children or the teachers. It's been painted that way, but that's not what's happening here. And I believe that any person that you can find who thinks this is different, I would really like to hear from them. Not taking the 4%, not taking the 4% revenue increase over time has a much more detrimental effect on the finances of the school district than taking the 4% and restricting a portion of it for some other use. That's just true. Because with not taking the 4%, you have the cumulative effect. So if not taking the 4% as a political move to try to stop the high school, or if it's some way to say, okay, we didn't take it for 2 years, so now give us a nickel, which is what we did last time. So now we did not get the nickel, and in addition, our revenues went down for those 2 years we didn't take it, and are increasing at 4% every year. So it's just a difference of priority here. Yes, we have to look at what's happening now. Yes, we have to look at our programs and our teachers, but we also have to look at our facility needs. That's part and parcel of providing the best education for these children.
If I can just respond.
And we are right now on this agenda item. I think that is.
But it's an either-or situation at this point. We do not have the money to set aside for this school. We see that clearly in the budget. So we can either continue to set aside and cause massive cuts to our students, our staff.
Sherry, what cuts have we experienced?
For that to the
What
budget.
cuts have we experienced, Sherry?
Either or.
What cuts?
Well, you're asking
If you think
with
if
this
you want
of
to
cuts,
give
we have
people,
$1 million. If we know we're overspending, deficit spending to the tune of $1 million, Debbie, then I think it's our obligation, if we are spending that money and setting it aside for this high school, it's our obligation to make those cuts and balance the budget. And that's
I
what you
agree,
said.
and that's why I would like Mr. Hawkins.
But that has not happened. That has not happened.
Right,
This
because
board
we
has
have not had
refused any cuts to balance the budget, even though the superintendent and finance officer have repeatedly recommended one cut. Restore the money that you're using for funding this high school back, and then you don't have to make any other cuts. We don't have to cut staff. We don't have to cut programs. But you got the same list I got at the first part of this year, and this board has continued to set aside this money, but failed to balance the budget.
Mr. Chenoweth, can I ask you a question?
Please, Ms. Eklund.
Oh, yes, please, Allison, please.
I would just like to point out that Ms. Springate continues to pound this $1 million deficit drum over and over and over and over again. But just last year, she voted against the tax increase, and as recent as last week, she did as well. So why did she vote against that? If this is going to be a continual argument every single month, we listen to this $1 million deficit that she just keeps hammering and hammering and hammering. Why is she voting against tax increase?
Allison, I would ask you the same question. Not only did I vote against it because of the current situation financially, you also voted against it.
Okay, ladies, you're talking at the same time. Sherry, you said, Allison, I will ask you the same question, and Ms. Richardson's trying to answer that question. Go ahead.
Absolutely. I have always stood behind the fact that it is time to stop raising taxes.
Then why are you spending them for this school? Why are you spending them? That was your resolution the Friday before the Monday vote to restrict the 350.
If you think that we have $1 million deficit and we need to raise taxes to fund everything that you want to fund, why did you vote against it, Sherry? Be honest and tell us.
We don't have to raise taxes to fund what I would like to fund, Allison. The reason we have the deficit is this high school. This high school is causing the deficit. If those funds are
Ladies, one at a time.
We don't have to ask the taxpayers for more money when we're taking their money and setting it aside for this school. When
Sherry,
we're using that money for the deficit.
Sherry, okay, Allison, go ahead.
How do you plan, if we have $1 million deficit, Sherry, and you voted against the tax raise? I'm not the one that has been shouting and pounding that we have $1 million deficit and that we're going to be taken over by the state and all this. You are the one who's putting that out there to the public. If you voted against the tax raise, tell me how you expect us to manage with $1 million deficit if you voted against tax raises.
Allison, it's very simple. You've received the same budget documents I have. You've been in the same meetings I have. Mr. Hawkins and Amy have clearly explained how cutting one thing, cutting the high school, the new partial high school, will balance or almost balance the budget. And then when you add the capital outlay funds back in, it will balance. So we don't have to keep asking the taxpayers for more funding to fund this high school. They voted on the nickel tax, no. We don't have to say then, well, we'll take it out anyway. We'll take it from general fund. We don't live above our means. We don't have expenses that are out of line with the exception of one item. And that item is this partial high school. And so again, maybe we should just have some sort of a budget session again so that that can be explained.
That we are operating in a deficit and we are starting in a deficit. You have continually said we are operating in a deficit, and now we're getting even further into that. So what you just said contradicts everything that you've said before.
Amy, maybe you could explain it to Allison. I'm not sure why she doesn't understand, but I'm not able to explain it more clearly. Is that
Ms. Springate, can I say something here? And I want to say, in a way, what Allison did makes logical sense to me. She voted against the tax increase. She lost. And so then she said, well, if we're going to have a tax increase anyway, let's put a portion of it to the high school so that, maybe we don't have, we're just chipping away at that high school, which is huge. And we know that it's the biggest thing we'll ever do, and it's the biggest thing any district ever builds. What does not make logical sense to me is don't raise taxes. I mean, again, it is much more, the long future of the district is much more negatively impacted by not taking the 4% than by taking the 4% and restricting some of it. And I believe all of this is leading to some kind of nickel strategy, but nobody's just going to say it. We're going to say we're protecting the taxpayer, and we don't need a nickel to build this high school. We don't. So,
If they will not get me to the
so,
issue.
is there any further discussion? Ms. Bradley, do you have any discussion on item? We are on item M.
Well, I have a question. So, Mr. Hawkins, we adopted the changes that you recommended that amounted, I think it was just under $300,000 in budget changes. Is that amount correct?
I think it was 240,000.
Was it 240? Okay. So with that 240,000 in positive impact, and then the income, even if we do the flat rate, how does that offset this $350,000 restriction? So if it's, we're now looking at a difference of 110,000, right?
Will depend on what our deficit is at the end of this year as well.
Okay.
But I mean, I don't know that I can. I'm going to have to look at different scenarios if you're wanting me to come back with some budget reductions, and I'll be happy to do that. I do want to make one point though, and I'm offended that you would say that I recommended a flat tax rate for political reasons. That's absolutely. I didn't say you did, but that statement was made tonight, and that is absolutely not true. And so I want to be very, very clear about why I recommended that. And that was, our community is hurting right now. And to ask them for additional tax burden at this point in time, I don't believe is right. So I want to be very clear, that's not political, that's on my heart. And that's why I made that recommendation.
Okay, thank you.
Tried that out there in the nickel tax as well.
I'm sorry?
I said our community spoke out about the same exact thing on the nickel tax as well, and I heard many people, including board members and former board members and people who supported the nickel tax, say $150 a year equals this much a month. That hurt them just as hard then as it does now. There's zero difference. Zero.
Okay, we have a motion and a second on this item M. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed? I don't have votes. I'm calling the roll. Mr. Wilson?
No.
Ms. Bradley?
No.
Ms. Richardson?
Ms. England, could you say that again, please?
The motion is to direct the superintendent to provide proposed budget reductions, not including or interfering with the construction of a new high school, to balance the budget with a contemplated flat tax rate. Such proposed reduction shall be provided to the board by July 13th, 2020.
No.
Did you vote, Ms. Richardson?
Yes, I said no.
Ms. Springate?
Yes. I think we need to balance the budget if we're going to be spending the money.
Okay, the chair votes yes. Motion fails 3-2. 2-3, I guess. All right, item N, set a meeting date for establishing procedures surrounding return to school for students and staff.
I'm going to make a request on this. I would ask that with this meeting, I think that the topic is so important that I would request that we not put any other items on, anything related to the high school or anything like that. I think we need a very narrow focus on that meeting agenda.
Well, we have some other things to do, so we'll be having 2 meetings then.
Okay, I think that's fine, but I think it's better to split those things up.
Okay, do we have a meeting date? This needs to be done by the end of June, Mr. Hawkins? that what you told us last week?
No, I said I'm hoping for guidance from the governor and from the Department of Health by the end of June. But I'm not certain when that may come. That's our hope.
Okay, so was this agenda item a little premature?
It could
Do
be.
you want to wait for that to set a meeting, or do we want to try to go ahead and find a date now, since sometimes it's difficult to find dates we can all come?
I think it would be best to wait until we get the guidance, because if we set a date now and we still don't have the information, then we've got to still set a date again. So
Okay.
that would be my suggestion.
And I don't think it really necessarily needs to be an agenda item. Sometimes it's just easier to set a date where we're all together. All right, item O, SWOT analysis for chosen funding option listed on BG1 for the new high school. Do I have a motion?
Debbie, before we do that, this was my item, and if the BG1 has been tabled, it would make sense just to also table.
Okay. Item P, develop written plan for chosen funding option listed on BG1 for new high school.
Again, it might make sense just to table this until we get the BG1 completed or approved.
Okay. All right, so then we have this old business. Ms. Springate, this is your item. You just let me know when you want to move that up to a regular agenda. It's creation of lead team. That was listed. We put that in old business last week.
Yeah, I think that's something you and I were going to get together and kind of work on. So after we do that, we can certainly move it up.
Okay. Discussion items. Ms. Bradley?
I am going to take a kind of a left turn on this and go back to a positive that came out of graduation. I wanted to share my thanks to Mr. Culbertson and the staff at Safe Harbor. He had a chance to tell me that with switching to the online instruction during the pandemic, he was able to reach out to some of our students who had not completed their graduation requirements last year, and they were actually able to get online and finish out their remaining requirements this year because of his action to reach out to them and say, hey, this is an option for you. And I think that's one of those things that's a life-changing thing for those students. And I think back to the times that we've discussed adult education and those people making the conscious decision to come back and finish, and how admirable that is. And I just want to share my thanks to our staff for doing that, and my pride to those people who finished and graduated and got that diploma that will change the course of their life and their abilities and opportunities.
Thank you. Ms. Springate?
Probably just want to quickly discuss the forum. My proposal would just be to allow people who had submitted questions that weren't answered to resubmit those questions, and then people who have new questions would just submit those. And then I think we could just use a similar process that we did with, that we use with public comment now, where we have Elaine or someone kind of just read those out. And Debbie, I don't know if you want the questions to be submitted to you and Mr. Hawkins like last time, or if you just want them submitted to Mr. Hawkins, but either way, we have to set a window for doing that. And then the last thing is just that we need to get some advertising in place for the forum, and I wanted to see if Mr. Hawkins and his staff could work on putting something together for us to look at by next week.
Mr. Hawkins, why don't you and I meet on this, or talk on this on the phone, look at what went well and what could have been improved from last time. I think one thing that definitely could have been improved was reviewing the questions earlier than the day of. So if it is acceptable to everyone else, I will suggest that he and I speak about this, kind of review what the protocol was last time, suggest something, and send it out to get the advertising up. Because we set it for July 7th, right?
Correct.
Okay. Ms. Richardson.
I would just like to echo what Mr. Wilson said during the board member comments with the recent matters that's going on. I thought that was an excellent review. I thought that the letter that superintendent wrote was just, it was bone chilling. It was very relevant, and I appreciate that he brought that tonight. I just wanted to say thank you to him. I thought that was great. Thank you, Ambrose.
You're welcome. Thank you very much.
Mr. Wilson?
Yeah, this is just a quick question for the superintendent. Mr. Hawkins, can you go back to your opening comments?
Okay.
You said something about parental survey. Can you read that part?
So feedback from our parents and our staff will be extremely beneficial
Keep going.
as those plans begin to take shape.
I thought you said something about as we return to school.
That I just said we will follow the guidance from the governor and the state health officials with the goal of having our students return to the classroom when school begins.
There's a lot of anxiousness in the community about are we going back or not. And I thought you said last week that you wanted to make a decision by July the 1st. Did I understand that correctly?
That it would be extremely beneficial if we have guidance from the governor and state health officials by the end of June so that we have the appropriate time to plan going forward. Right now, based on the feedback we've received, our start date is still August 13th. And so we've not had any feedback up to this point to indicate that would need to be altered at this point. But it's a matter of what's it going to look like when we can start school.
What feedback are we waiting for?
From the governor?
Yes.
Are we going to be held to a strict 6 feet apart in a classroom? Are we going to have to wear masks? How frequently are we going to be able to use the cafeteria for lunch? What are the protocols for students when they get on a bus, when they come into the classroom, or when they come into the school building? I mean, there are several things that I think will dictate how a day will look and what we would be able to do inside that classroom. Those are the pieces that we don't know. I mean, for example, 3 weeks ago, they said 1 student every other seat on the bus. And now we can get 2 students in every seat as long as they're in a mask. So will that change any type of social distancing, again, requirement in the classroom? That's the part we don't know. And that's the part that's so important in terms of planning.
And you've received no guidance about mask or social distancing?
As of right now, they are saying people will be in a mask. I don't know if that's going to change.
I don't understand why you say you have to wait for the governor, but the governor, I don't know, you keep referring to they, but they have told you you're going to have to wear a mask. They have told you you're going to have social distancing, haven't they?
As of right now, but again, I don't know if those social distancing guidelines may change. Is it going to be acceptable to have because here's the thing, Mr. Wilson, if it truly is 6 feet apart, then only maybe 12 to 15 students can be in a classroom. But if it's 4 feet apart, we may be able to get 21 or 22 in a classroom. And so that's very different.
Your statement said we are waiting for the governor's office and the Department of Education to give us instructions. They've given you instructions.
We are waiting for that final guidance because that information changes almost every week.
How much has changed about mask and social distancing?
Well, the mask and the social distancing, that people, they recommend that you mask and social distance, but it's specifically important to wear a mask if you can't social distance. And again, I think that's going to be important to know. Is it okay for students to be 3 or 4 feet apart from each other in a classroom? I don't know that.
But you said that they told you there would have to be 6 feet apart and people would have to wear masks.
Right.
Okay.
As of right now.
As of right now. So we're going to delay the plans to see if they change it.
Well, at this point in time, Mr. Wilson, I'm not sure that we can only take 12 students in a classroom, because 75% of the parents have indicated they want as much in-person instruction as possible. So I do think those are in conflict right now. And I think until we get final determination, and the governor has said clearly, he wants students to come back to the classroom.
He does want to, but he is not going to make every decision for us.
I understand that. I understand that. But again, right now, if we have to follow a strict 6 foot apart in every classroom, and I have 70% of our parents want their child to come back to school, we can't make that work. And so that who do you say gets to come back and who doesn't? So until we get a final determination that says this is what you can do in a classroom, then it's our obligation to make plans accordingly.
But we're not making plans. We're waiting to see if he changes.
We are planning every single day.
All right. But
is this ultimately a local decision?
Not on the social distance and the mask. Or the temperature checks, or those types of things. Those are going to be the final guidelines that are submitted, or that we hope will be submitted.
I thought we were going to try to do this by July 1st, and it doesn't sound like that's going to be the case.
So, Mr. Hawkins, would you then advocate for as soon as those final recommendations come from KDE, we'll schedule a meeting immediately thereafter?
Yes.
And I know that you had said that your thought was any sort of a staggered schedule was not really optimal or doable. Is that still where you're at with it?
I'm not sure how you could do an every other day or every other week model. And you know, the key will be, once we get the final guidance, is then we need to really go out with our with almost like an online registration with parents to say, okay, we need to know, is your child coming back or are they not? I mean, because if you remember the data from last week, nearly 37% of parents said it depends. And some of it would depend on what those final guidelines are. And so I think it's important. We told them, you know, in the initial survey that right now it's mask. And a big response from parents was, I may not send my child back if they are in a mask. So
yeah, and that's understandable, especially for our younger kids.
So to Mr. Wilson's question, it's pretty hard to make a plan when you don't know what that final piece is going to be.
Well, this is Sherry, and I would just say I appreciate you all reaching out to parents, because I do think that that's the key. Like, we have to obviously follow the guidelines of the governor, and we obviously have to follow health department and CDC guidelines, but to reach out to parents and get their input and take into account their needs and the students' needs, and to try to balance all that is kind of tricky. So thank you all.
All right. You know, I was gonna say something about some things that were said tonight that I was gonna review, but I'm not gonna go down that negative path. We all just need to be careful about our words, be careful that what we ask of others is what we also do in response to each other, and try to, you know, continually improve the working of the board together. So I'm gonna talk about what Mr. Wilson started with, and I think Ms. Richardson I talked about this as well. I want to thank you so much for Ambrose for those statements, for reading that letter. A lot of it rang true to me. I think we've talked about this before. In February, I believe it was late February, some minority students. And when I say minority, I'm not just talking about African American. There were some Hispanic children there. I believe there may have been some students that identify LGBTQ. And just talking about their experience in our high school with discrimination. And it was palpable. Their pain was palpable. It was very, very real. They were so well spoken, so thoughtful. I am a white woman, and I understand that I can never, ever in a million years understand. I can feel their pain, but I don't understand it. And I just think that we are in a different time, and I hope so. And really what we can affect the most is our little community. I've heard we've had several overtly racial incidences this year. We have had reports of bullying for kids who are, gay or trans, and for our Latino students. And sometimes I've heard our leaders say, well, this was just an isolated incident, or this isn't who we are. But I can assure you, after listening to those kids in that room, that to them, every day, this is what Woodford County is. And it may not be that way for us, but we can't dismiss their experience. So I really hope we are making a turning point, and we are going to not brush things off and really concentrate on what's really happening to a good part of our students. We can't talk the talk and not walk the walk, like Mr. Wilson talked about actions. We cannot support LGBTQ and then in this behind the scenes do scare tactics about bathrooms, or we cannot see our kids subject to overtly racist remarks and then worry mostly that they might retaliate. We really have to show them, and that's what the message I got that day. Talk is cheap, and their pain is real. And I hope that this is a turning point in our nation, but mainly in our community, because again, that's what we can have the most impact on. So Mr. Wilson, I thank you for bringing this up tonight. I think it's something we really need to focus on going forward. And so that's all. So do we have a motion to adjourn?
Just a couple.
Wait, we have a second.
Couple quick things, Miss Elam. We do have closed session tonight.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I forgot again. I was trying to get out of here.
I would also.
Yes, Mr. Hawkins, we have a need for an executive session.
Can I say something just real quick? I've been working on a statement very similar to what Mr. Wilson read earlier, and I sent that to the board on Friday. And I would really appreciate your feedback because that I haven't gotten any yet, and that was important. I felt like it was important for us to do a similar type statement. We have been working with multiple staff members across our district in drafting that, and I think it states our position very, very clearly on that, and so. I would like your feedback, but because I held off on sending that out, I was hesitant to do so without the board giving me their feedback and response.
Okay, I will make a point of doing that. All right, so we need executive session for two different reasons. Am I correct, Mr. Hawkins?
That is correct.
Do you have the statutory reference for us?
It is for 61.8101B property and 61.8101C litigation.
Okay, do we have a motion to go into executive session for those two matters?
So moved.
By Ms. Bradley, is there a second?
Second.
By Ms. Richardson, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay, opposed? All right, so we will go into executive session. Mr. Hawkins.
Everyone who is on the Google Hangout here that is not a board member needs to go ahead and other than Mr. Chenoweth, and go ahead and exit the meeting if you don't mind, please.
And then there's precautions in effect that they have in fact exited and are not able to get back in. Is that correct?
We can see them on the screen as they exit, so.
Okay. All right.
And Debbie, I just